بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. First of all, thank you so much for giving me time at your general body meeting. I know that these meetings are always incredibly busy, very filled with important business. So to get this chunk of time to share research with you is really a huge honor and privilege for me. I actually lived in this region until just last Ramadan. So I moved away from Southern California back to Washington, D.C. in 2017. So this was my community for some time, so it's really a pleasure to be back. I want to share research with you. My name's, as you heard, Dalia Mogahed, and I direct research at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding. I'll tell you a little bit of background on the organization. But I'm very excited to share this research with you. I think it's one of the most important projects that the organization has ever done. We call it Reimagining Muslim Spaces, creating welcoming mosques for all. So just so you have some background, for anyone who's not familiar with our research organization, ISPU, the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, conducts subjective solution seeking, that's a very key word in our mission, research that empowers American Muslims to develop their communities and fully contribute to democracy and pluralism in the United States. So we have 3 areas of work. We do what we call social policy. This is where we do research that helps Muslims develop. We do public policy, where we research any obstacles to full contribution and inclusion and equality. And then we do what we call thought leadership, where we contribute a space for Muslim Americans to have brainstorms, convenings, debates, and also this is the area of work where we contribute American Muslim voices to the wider national conversation by engaging the media. So to accomplish our mission in these 3 areas, this is how we do it. We discover, we educate, we enable. So we are a research organization, but we don't stop there. We do rigorous academic grade research, but we also educate and we enable leaders. We don't stop at publishing a glossy report. We go out into the community and we share our research, and we also have other modules of communication. If you go out on our website, you can watch videos. There are infographics you can share with your networks. We even provide the PowerPoints that we do our presentations with so that you can take them into your community and do the exact same presentation with your network and your constituents. We are in the business of the opposite of intellectual property. We want to share and spread the information as far and wide as possible. So, reimagining Muslim spaces, creating a welcoming, inclusive, dynamic mosque. Why did we do this? Why did we decide to do a research project on mosques and how to make them more inclusive, engaging for all? First of all, because mosques are good for society. Mosques matter. We found in our research that even if you are, aside from the obvious benefit of a mosque, of increasing one's connection and spiritual growth, frequent mosque attendance is linked to more volunteerism. It's linked to better mental health. These are all actually empirical studies, and it's linked to better civic engagement. More like people who attend a mosque frequently are more likely to be registered to vote, more likely to actually participate in an election. So mosques are good for America. Mosques are good for society overall. They strengthen our democracy. They make people happier. Yet, the challenge is that mosques are often also seen or felt to be alienating to many people, especially women, converts, and young people. So we want to get better. The challenge is that many young adults, women and converts, tell us in our research that they don't feel they belong when they enter their local mosque. Mosque leaders at the same time complain about the lack of volunteers, the lack of commitments from those who attend the mosque. And mosque attendees complain about the lack of unity, the lack of sense of belonging. So how do we address all of these issues at once? Why should we make mosques more welcoming? Yes. Can you hear me in the back? Arif, can you hear me? Okay. Here are the possible benefits. This is sort of like a pharmaceutical commercial, but here are the possible benefits of making your mosque more welcoming. It could likely increase the number of volunteers, sustain your donors, increase cleanliness in the mosque, increase spiritual engagement, promote stronger, more vibrant communities, build hubs for hope, become a hub for social service for the wider society, provide sanctuaries of support in what is, for many of us, a hostile social and political climate, and grow the next generation of Muslim Americans. So I hope I've made the case for why this is important for us as an American Muslim community to make our mosques vibrant, inclusive, and welcoming for all. So how did we go about this research? I want to just stop a minute and explain our methodology. So the first thing to mention is the primary investigator on this research is Dr. Ihsan Bagbi. Dr. Ihsan Bagbi is someone I think every single one of you knows. He is a scholar that has been working on research on mosques for decades. He's really I would say, the top scholar in our country on this topic, and he led this research. And where he started is to develop a vision of the prophetic mosque as a guide and a goal. And then we researched the situation currently. But we did it in a way that's a little different from how we normally research this kind of issue. And I told you about the challenges. So we could have done focus groups and surveys all over the country and asked people what's wrong with mosques. That's already been done, not by us, but by many other people. So we decided to do something a little different. Remember I said we were solution seekers. So what we did instead is we used a methodology called appreciative inquiry. And I encourage all of you to read about it. It's a scholarly academic methodology for system transformation. And some of you may even be familiar with it because it's used in corporations around the country and around the world. It's even used to transform cities and entire countries. But it asks a completely different question. It doesn't ask what are the problems. It asks, when have you had a positive experience in this system? In this case, a mosque. And then it studies that kind of a positive experience and asks, how can we amplify and increase those positive experiences? So that's what we did. The goal of our Reimagining Muslim Spaces project is to produce research-driven recommendations for mosques that are welcoming, as well as hubs for hope, a source for community service. And we accomplished this through extensive literature review. So we looked at what have not only Muslims, but other communities, other religious communities done to make their places of worship more engaging for these groups. We did focus groups across the country. We analyzed every available survey on Muslim Americans. We did one-on-one interviews with leaders. And we had the advice of a diverse task force of experts. We came out with a report called Creating a Welcoming and Inclusive Dynamic Mosque. We also have several case studies of actual mosques that have created projects that you may want to emulate in your own community and can read those case studies to learn what they did. We also have a community toolkit. So if you're inspired by this presentation, would like to implement these things in your community, we have a toolkit for you that we would be happy to share with you free of charge. and we have links to resources. And that's the website where you can find all these resources. And I think it will also be included in the minutes for this meeting. So if you don't happen to write it down, you will get it through in your email later on. These are some of the case studies as examples. I'm just going to go ahead and move forward. This was our project team, of course, headed by Dr. Hassan Bagbi. Our project task force had many familiar names that you may know. Dr. Altaf Hussein, for example, Hazem Bata, who used to be the Secretary General of ISNA, and many others. So project findings, let's go ahead and jump in. First, I want to set the stage to share a little bit more about who the American Muslim community is. It's very interesting because we are all, if we're in this room, likely we are Muslim Americans, right? But that doesn't mean we're always aware of what our community looks like from a national lens. The first thing to note is that American Muslims are by far the youngest in terms of age, not in terms of average age, not when they arrived in America, but the average age of American Muslims is much younger than the average age of any other faith community. We are the youngest faith community in America. So if young people or young professionals are not in the mosque, something's wrong, because they are actually a very large percentage of our community. Now, interestingly, our young people are somewhat unique from their generational peers in the United States. So if you look at this graph, here's what you'll notice. Young people in the general public are less likely than their elders to attend a religious service, right? They're also less likely than their elders to say religion is important to them. This is a trend throughout the United States. Young people are leaving religion. Now, what do you notice about the Muslim side of this? Young people in the Muslim community, I don't know how to point, but it's the very top one, are as likely as older Muslims to say religion is important to them. So, alhamdulillah, the trend of leaving religion or of being less likely to think religion is important it does not apply to young people in our community. However, young people are less likely to attend a religious service. So there is some obstacles, whatever they may be, to young people attending a religious service, and it's not that they don't think Islam is important, unlike their peers. So this is a very important trend to keep in mind. Muslims are also the most ethnically diverse faith community in America, by far. Muslims are the only faith community in America with no majority race. Okay, everyone else has a majority. It's actually a white majority. Muslims are not a majority of any group. We have 25% of Muslim Americans identify as black, 24 identify as, quote, white, 18 as Arab, 18 as Asian, 7 as Latino or Latinx, 7 as mixed, 5 as Latinx, and that has gone up to 7 since then. And we have, 1% that identify as Native American, and then there are other. Very diverse, by far the most diverse. Now, before anyone freaks out and asks me, how can you say 24% are white? Let me just explain that. That's always the question I get, so maybe no one's going to ask, but in case someone's wondering, I'm going to explain. First of all, these are all self-reported. So we call people on the phone, we ask them a bunch of demographic questions. If they identify as white, we're not going to do a DNA test, right? They're just telling us what they are over the phone. But that doesn't mean 24% are necessarily of Caucasian background in the United States and converted to Islam. There are Turkish Muslims, Bosnian Muslims, Russian Muslims. There's lots of Muslims who would identify as white. There are also some Arab Muslims identify as white, even when Arab is an option to pick. So that's where the 24% comes from. That's just the number of, that's just the percentage that identify as each group. The point is being, we are a very diverse community, and we have to work really hard to make sure our national organizations, our regional organizations reflect this ethnic diversity. Come on, it was working so well. Okay, thank you for going. All right, so American Muslim, half of American Muslims were born in the United States, half were born outside the United States. 86% of Muslims are American citizens, and 14 are not citizens. So the story of American Muslims is not all immigrant. And at the same time, we can't deny the immigrant experience as a part of the American Muslim story. The other piece that we maybe forget in some cases is that a lot of Muslims are poor. Actually, Muslims are the most likely to report low income. 35%, more than a third of Muslim Americans are at or right above the poverty line. And so is that something we're even aware of, or are we creating resources and services for this segment of our community? I'm sorry that if there's anything you can do to help me with this, I would appreciate it, because it's always easier if I can do it. So we'll start with, oh, now it's working. Am I pointing it at the wrong? Okay. So we'll start with how to make mosques more welcoming overall. So the first thing to note is, again, remember the question we asked: what is the most engaging, positive experience you've ever had in a mosque? And we asked people to actually imagine and visualize that experience. And then we asked them, what did it look like? What did it sound like? Describe that experience. And above everything else, people didn't talk about how gorgeous the rugs were, how beautiful the chandelier was. No one said anything about that. What they said is how it felt. And they repeatedly, people talked about feeling welcomed. Feeling welcomed. It's like a primal human need to feel like you belong somewhere. To go somewhere like the old Cheers song, where everyone knows your name. That's what people are looking for in their lives. If they don't find it at the mosque, they will find it somewhere in their life, in some association. So people are looking for belonging. It's one of our most basic human needs. And this is what people said over and over to describe that positive experience in a mosque. So to develop a sense of community, a sense of belonging, you must develop a sense that people are welcomed. So some just direct quotes from our social groups, our focus groups. Automatically, I was welcomed. People smiled, the warmth, the salams, and just a sense of, it doesn't matter if you're not, if you're new or you're not one of us, you are one of us because you are here. Someone else said, the thing I most love about my mosque is the sense of generosity and hospitality, the sense of belonging. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said what means, you will not enter paradise until you believe, and you will not believe until you love one another, so spread salam among yourselves. So I'm just going to go through briefly some of the recommendations. There are many more about each category in the report that you can look at. And we really worked hard to make them very pragmatic, very doable recommendations for leaders. So one of our recommendations for fostering this kind of an environment is to actually form a welcoming committee in your mosque. They would do things like give salams and assistance to all who enter for Jummah and other events. They would start conversations afterwards to get to know people. They would find out about people's interests and expertise and have them fill out information cards, and they would encourage involvement in events and committees. So to actually make a very deliberate effort to bring people into the community. Develop a culture of everyone being welcomed. So some simple things we can do. Say salam to people praying next to them. And this is something that leaders can model. Leaders are leaders because they bring people, they guide people along. They say salam to one another after Jummah, even when from different ethnic groups or they don't know each other, they go around and greet each other. When a new person comes in, smile and say salam, and actually give khutbahs on being welcoming. And leadership does provide the example for that. So that's in general about welcoming everyone. Now, specific to young adults. Now, we define young adults, just for the sake of this report, as 18 to 29-year-olds. So this is actually a group that oftentimes are completely absent from the mosque. So young people, kids come to the mosque because they're sort of forced to for Sunday school. Then you're in college and you might go to an MSA, and so you're sort of involved in the community in some way. But then when people leave the university in that young adult kind of age, they aren't there. They often disappear from the mosque. And so this is about bringing young adults back to the masjid, or removing the obstacles from their desired engagement in the mosque. So these are the 18 to 29-year-olds who are less likely to go to a religious service, but they do say religion is important to them as much as their elders. And the two things that came out of the research was relevance and dynamism. Be relevant, be dynamic. So what distinguished really engaging mosques that really brought people in this age category? People in our focus group said this. They give extremely relevant khutbahs. So every time it seems that it's not the same really abstract concept, it's usually something that's very relevant, and they can and that something that they can implement in their lives, things that they see in their everyday lives. I just want something relevant. So despite not really asking for complaints, people did complain anyway about khutbahs that seemed too esoteric or too legalistic. And what they found much more helpful is things that addressed issues that they were dealing with in their own lives, personally, or dealing with in society at large. So staying relevant, mosques must invite inspiring, knowledgeable speakers and khatibs who can speak eloquently and powerfully to the topics of interest in the community, whether the topic is spiritual or worldly. Khutbahs in particular need to be regularly evaluated. So to implement an actual khutbah evaluation process in your masajid, to ask your community to suggest topics for khutbahs that they would like to hear about. It costs no money to put a suggestion box right in your musalla and actually have people write down topics and put it in that box. It will help you come up with the topics that you want to cover. Being dynamic with a sense of mission. So people are searching for meaning. Basically, when it comes down to it, what people want from their mosque is a sense of belonging and a sense of meaning. Two basic human needs that we all need to survive, this world called the dunya. We need belonging, we need meaning. So, and we look to our spiritual community for that. Everyone does. The dynamic mosque offers numerous opportunities for participants to become involved, and as a result, the mosque feels alive, vibrant, and exciting. Being dynamic means developing a clear understanding of the mosque's mission, which is tied to the vision of Islam and the prophetic mosque. And one, concrete example, concrete recommendation is to conduct a strategic planning process to identify the mosque's mission. You can also identify interests and facilitate the formation of small groups. So the mosques that really were successful at bringing in these young people, 18 to 29-year-olds, it wasn't necessarily that they were themselves, the board itself was coming up with amazing programs. It was only that they were getting out of the way. They were just giving people platforms and space to create their own programming, and these, and the enthusiasm and the talent would come in and do their own thing. So it's really about just giving people, empowering people with space and time to form their own small groups and committees. Recommendations for women. That's always where I need to get a drink and just everybody relax, take a lot of deep breaths. All right. All right, so I actually like to start with this ayah, which I think captures so beautifully and so succinctly the Quranic vision for the relationship between men and women in our community. The Quranic example and vision for that relationship. This is from Surah At-Tawbah, and I'll read you the translation. The believing men and the believing women are guardians for one another, awliya. They advocate virtue, forbid evil, perform the prayers, practice charity, and obey God and His messenger. These, God will have compassion on them. God is noble and wise. So this ayah is so all-encompassing. It describes this relationship of mutual protection, of being guardians of one another, advocating on each other's behalf, protecting each other's rights. And what I find especially interesting about this ayah is that it is in Surah At-Tawbah. And Surah At-Tawbah, as I'm sure many of you know, was a surah that was revealed at a time of great difficulty for the community, at a time when actually the community was facing existential threats, where they were going to disappear, where they were under siege. And why I think that's so important is oftentimes people will respond to any statements or any sort of conversation about making mosques more inclusive for men and women with this idea that, like, we shouldn't even have to, we shouldn't be talking about this. Islam is under siege. Islam is under threat. Why are you weakening us with this kind of nonsense? We don't have time to deal with your complaints. And the teaching came at a time when the community was actually far more under siege, far more threatened than we are now. And it is especially because there is so much external threat to our community that we have to be strong on the inside. We have to be solid on the inside. We have to heal these kinds of cracks in our community, whether they be along gender, generational, ethnic, class lines. So I just want to kind of put up what are some of the challenges we may be facing. Muslim women are more likely than men to suffer post-election. This is, of course, the 2016 election. We are all suffering in some way, and I think we don't always recognize there is a real impact on our collective mental health. It's not in your head, it's real. You have here fear, so the question was, as a result of the outcome of the 2016 presidential election, have you done any of the following? And these are the percentage of people in the Muslim community in 2017 who answered yes. Feared for your personal safety or that of your family from white supremacist groups like neo-Nazis and the Ku Klux Klan. This is actually, you yourself feared for your personal safety from like a hate crime. 47% of Muslim women. That's crazy. Half of Muslim women are actually afraid for their personal safety compared to almost a third of Muslim men. Made plans to leave the country if it becomes necessary. 21% of Muslim women, 16% of Muslim men. And then
suffered emotionally with stress and anxiety enough to believe you need the service of a mental health professional. 19% of Muslim women. 1 in 5 Muslim women feel that their anxiety and stress is that severe because of the outcome of the election. And now things, maybe people have sort of dealt with it and adjusted, and it's not as bad as it was in 2017 or right after it happened. But I do want to paint this picture that there is so much outside stress that we need to create sanctuaries for, rather than places where people are not feeling that kindness and compassion from their fellow Muslims. There's also just things like discrimination. Muslim women are among the most likely group in our community to experience religious discrimination, as are young people and those who identify as Arabs. This is religious discrimination. Muslim women are also more likely than Muslim men to take action post-election. And this is something you might be interested in. Increase your donation to organizations associated with your faith community. 29% of Muslim women, as a result of the election, increased their donations, as opposed to, compared to 19% of Muslim men. So you don't want to alienate the group that is interested in donating more. They are the ones with the enthusiasm to try to get things moving forward. The other thing to, sort of dispelling a myth, this is not an anomaly. I have seen study after study after study that has shown this result, and everyone always gets so excited when I say, not excited in a good way, but there's a lot of resistance to this data. So here's what it says. Women and men actually attend mosques at a similar rate. Okay? And so the first thing is, did you attend a mosque once a week or more? 45% of Muslim men, 35% of Muslim women. Yes, there's a difference, a little bit less, but actually statistically it's not even significant. 87% of Muslim men say religion is important, 91% of Muslim women say religion is important. Whether 45 and 35 are the same number or they're not, the point being that it's a very similar number. So in terms of frequency of attendance, Muslim women are not that different from Muslim men. And what does that mean? It means that arguments around space allocation and resource allocation being so much less for women because they're not attending or they don't come they're not valid. They're not valid. They're not empirically valid. They are models from a different part of the world. And why I say that is because I've done research on Muslims globally. What is so interesting, in most parts of the world, it's true. Women attend mosques way less than men. Way, way less than men. But in the United States, interestingly, it's the only country I've ever studied where there's almost a parity between the two groups in American mosques. So America is a bit of a unique situation where our mosques have to cater to men and women really equally. All right. The other thing I want to point out is women in America look to the mosque for support in the most difficult situations. So at ISPU, we asked a question about domestic violence. Now, what we always do in our research is we never only ask Muslims anything, because we think that that's just fundamentally going to and people will misinterpret any data we get out. So we always ask the same question of everyone. Muslims, Jews, Catholics, Protestants, non-affiliated Americans, people who don't affiliate with any faith, and then we just look at the general public. So the question was, do you know a person in your faith community who was the victim of violence from someone in their family in the past 12 months? 13% of Muslims said yes to that, as did 15% of Catholics, 17% of Protestants, 14% of non-affiliated, 15% of the general public. So Muslims are no different than anyone else on the frequency by which that they know of this thing happening. Where Muslims are different is here. Interestingly, Did this person report it to a faith leader? That's the light blue one at the bottom. 51% of Muslims said that the person who was victimized reported it to a faith leader. Look at how everyone else answers on that light blue one at the bottom. 28% of Jews, 23% of Catholics, 35% of Protestants, and so forth. Muslim women are going to their faith leaders with this problem more than any other faith community. And what does that tell us? It actually tells us, I think it tells me a couple things. As someone interpreting this, I would say first, Muslim women are expecting support from their faith community when they're victimized by domestic violence. They're not expecting their faith leader to tell them, that they're the problem, to blame them. It's also telling me that as a community, we have to train our faith leaders to be able to deal with this, right? Because they are dealing with it even more often than other faith leaders who are trained. I guarantee priests and rabbis and most Protestant heads of churches are trained in some way on things like what to do about domestic violence if someone comes to them. So this kind of training is incredibly important. So, point being, Muslim women expect and are coming to our masajid for support in these issues. So some of the specific comments that we heard from some of the focus group attendees, I hate the fact that I can't see the speaker. So the idea of visual access to the imam. When I see a woman on the board, I automatically feel the mosque is more open to women, the inclusion of women in leadership. I did want to, this isn't me, of course, I'm no authority whatsoever, but the Shura Council of North America is an authority, and it included people like Sheikh Yasser Qadi, Sheikh Omar Sulaiman, and Imam Muhammad Magid. And what they said in their statement is, we call upon masajids to ensure that women have access to the main musalla to perform salah, listen to the Jummah khutbah, or attend and participate in lectures and discussions. That was their recommendation. And second, the Prophet ﷺ did not have a formal shura process, but he did set the example of consulting with all segments of the Muslim community, including women. Masjids in North America, however, do have formal decision-making mechanisms, and it is therefore incumbent that women participate in all processes of formal shura, including serving on the governing bodies of masajid.
Stop working 5 minutes.
Yeah, I might have to start. Okay. So the recommendations from as coming out, drawing from the council statement, is that women should have the choice to pray in the main musalla or in a separate area, and a lot of masajid will, put a little footnote that choice is available outside of Jummah because of space constraints. But as long as there is a choice, in general, most of the time, women should also serve on masjid boards and be part of masjid leadership, is the recommendation from that study. Okay. And this will be the final section, which is recommendations for converts, or another way is new Muslims. Okay, so people who have entered Islam relatively recently. So converts make up about 20% of our community. People who did not grow up Muslim make up, according to research, 20%. 1 in 5 of us did not grow up Muslim in America. Here's what Pew actually found in 2015 that was probably going to be surprising to many of us. According to Pew, 1 in 5 Muslim adults was not raised in a Muslim family, so what I just said. But the second thing is maybe more shocking. The same study found that the same number of Americans were raised in a Muslim household, but no longer identify as Muslim. So our people coming in and people leaving according to this study, are at equal rates. This is very important to keep in mind. I will say that this study did show, not that it really makes us feel any better, that Muslims are the least likely faith community to lose people. That growing up Catholic and not being Catholic anymore was way, way higher, as was Jewish, etc. But still, 1 in 5 people growing up in a Muslim family no longer identifying as adults is not something that we should take lightly. Here's what our focus group said when it came to being a convert. I, a convert, feel most comfortable when I know that I have a friend there to talk to. Social needs was the most important thing we heard over and over and over and over again. We always think that what converts need, at least, in general, what I've observed, most mosques are under the impression that the biggest need someone entering Islam has is education. And while it is a need, it's not the most important need. The most important need is social support. Social support trumps, comes before education by miles. When the experience in a mosque is really great is when I make a friend. Okay, so this idea of social support over and over and over. So that's like stellar. So I don't feel socially uncomfortable and awkward when I'm trying to make social talk with people. Thank you. So some really concrete recommendations. To address the social needs of converts, develop a mentoring program, right? So mentors should be trained, this is key, to shepherd new converts through the initial phase of conversion. The most important responsibility of a mentor is to socialize with the new Muslim, sharing meals, doing activities together, and supporting a convert in various ways. They really have to, it's almost like adopting someone into your family. This is really, I just cannot emphasize how important this is for people when they're entering Islam and when they're joining the community. In the absence of this, it's actually very hard for people to stay. So I'm just going to go, I just want to go back one thing. Okay, next steps, and then I'll end here. If you would like more than just what's on our website and our toolkit, and you want an actual workshop in your community, you can contact ISNA to have this workshop. So Dr. Ihsan Bekbi is conducting these workshops based on this research. And he can come to your community and do a full-day workshop with your board and with your leadership to teach you and co-create a plan to create a welcoming, dynamic mosque, and then to also talk about good masjid governance, creating women-friendly masajid, and creating a green masjid. And then finally, these are the things to learn more, join our mailing list, read the full report at ispu.org/RMS, become a sustaining member of ISPU. And that's the website one more time. Jazakallah khair.